Lecture number 5, we're going to continue our story about regulation of the glomerular filtration rate. Now, as I mentioned on the last lecture, the kidneys are pretty good at controlling this themselves through the myogenic mechanism, and then also through the functions of that juxtaglomerular apparatus that we talked about. But during cases where blood pressure falls very, very low, extrinsic mechanisms need to kick in to control glomerular filtration. That means the nervous system and the endocrine system are going to wind up having to get involved. All right, so as we've already discussed, under normal conditions at rest, blood pressure is between 80 and 180, mean arterial blood pressure. Renal blood vessels are dilated. You got good blood flow into the kidneys, blood flowing normally into afferent arterioles, and blood's going to flow normally into the glomeruli, and the renal autoregulation will prevail. So GFR will be controlled by how much blood is allowed to pass from the afferent arterioles into the glomeruli. All right, but let's say you're under extreme stress. Fairly quickly, you guys know, whenever the body is under any kind of stress, norepinephrine is released by the sympathetic nervous system, and epinephrine is released by the adrenal medulla. You know these as noradrenaline and adrenaline as well. So that can happen pretty quickly. Both of these chemicals will cause vasoconstriction. We've learned that before because that's going to help increase your peripheral resistance and can increase blood pressure if you have low blood pressure happening in the body. So these chemicals will cause constriction of the afferent arterioles. Okay, so you squeeze those, less blood makes it into the glomeruli, and that helps lower the glomerular filtration rate. All right, so why would we want to do that? If you're under a stressful situation, you need to maintain your blood pressure very quickly. And if you're experiencing fluid loss, for example, let's say you're going into shock and your blood pressure needs to be elevated very quickly. Well, you don't want as much blood flowing into glomeruli in your kidneys and squeezing fluids out. So limiting glomerular filtration helps conserve fluids temporarily and can help maintain blood pressure. So that's something that can happen fairly quickly too. There's a downside to that though. You can't limit glomerular filtration for very long because wastes and toxins are going to build up in the blood. Also, you're going to have inappropriate composition of electrolytes and so forth in the blood as well. So we're going to need renin. We're going to have to go back to our renin-angiotensin story to help bring that blood pressure up in a more long-term way, and that will allow us to restore glomerular filtration. All right, so just to review our renin-angiotensin story. Now, we learned about this when we covered blood pressure, but now we're seeing where this is actually happening in the kidneys. We talked about how the kidneys secrete renin. Now you're actually seeing the cells and so forth at a more detailed level where this is happening. So if the mean arterial pressure drops below 80 millimeters of mercury, those granular cells that we were taking a look at on the diagram of the glomerulus and the juxtaglomerular apparatus, or your JGA, they flank the afferent arteriole. They're mechanoreceptors. We talked about that in the last video lecture. So when those cells realize they're not being stretched by blood flow, they release renin. Okay, and then renin is an enzyme. Renin clips angiotensinogen. Angiotensinogen is a globulin. That's a globular-shaped protein that's in your blood. It's in an inactive form. That ogen suffix usually refers to something that's present in an inactive state. Renin basically clips part of this off, and it becomes angiotensin 1. You also have these enzymes in your blood all the time, angiotensin converting enzyme, or ACE. Once angiotensin 1 is around, ACE enzymes will clip angiotensin 1 proteins to form angiotensin 2. And then this is a powerful hormone. It's a protein hormone or a peptide hormone, so it is a chain of amino acids, but it functions as a hormone that has lots of effects around the body, as we learned earlier when we were studying blood pressure. Okay, some of the effects that it does. How does angiotensin 2 help us raise our blood pressure? Constricts arteriolar smooth muscle. So it's going to cause vasoconstriction around the body. So, earlier we've been focusing in on what's going on in the kidneys. Now we're back to talking about across the whole body at once. So that increases your peripheral resistance, and that helps you increase your blood pressure. Angiotensin 2 also stimulates reabsorption of sodium ions from your renal tubules. Does that in two ways. It directly stimulates it, so it can directly signal the cells that are in the walls of the renal tubules reabsorb sodium back into the body fluids. But then also angiotensin 2 goes to the adrenal cortex, as we learned at the very beginning of the semester, and it stimulates the adrenal cortex to secrete aldosterone. Aldosterone also leads to reabsorption of sodium ions out of the filtrate, out of the developing urine, and back into your body fluids. And remember, an increase in sodium ions in your body fluids leads to increased water being present in your blood and other body fluids, because water follows salt, and that's going to increase your blood pressure. Okay, angiotensin 2, another target, the hypothalamus. It tells the hypothalamus to secrete ADH out of the posterior pituitary gland. ADH is antidiuretic hormone. That stimulates reabsorption of water. So you have increased water reabsorption. More water staying in the blood pressure goes up. It also tells the hypothalamus to activate the thirst center, so you feel thirsty and you'll drink more fluids. Another thing that angiotensin 2 does, which we didn't really talk about when we were doing blood pressure regulation, because we hadn't moved into the nitty-gritty topics of the kidneys yet, it actually constricts the efferent arterioles. Okay, and so downstream from there, this will take a couple of steps of thinking here. The efferent arterioles lead to your peritubular capillaries. Okay, so the peritubular capillaries are the microscopic blood vessels that surround the nephron, the tubules of the nephrons, where urine formation is taking place. All right, so if you have less blood that's flowing into these peritubular capillaries, then the hydrostatic pressure in there will be lower. And because of that, that helps them take up more fluid. They'll take in more water. All right, so remember, capillaries, if you have a high hydrostatic pressure, they're going to push fluids out. If you reduce that hydrostatic pressure, it's going to make it easier for fluids to move back into the capillary. So that's another way that angiotensin 2 helps increase the water levels in the blood, and then that also helps increase our blood pressure. There's a fifth thing that angiotensin 2 does. This is like a miracle hormone. The glomerular mesangial cells, which are part of that JG apparatus, along with the macula densa cells and the granular cells that we've already talked about. Those cells will actually, no, I'm sorry, the glomerular mesangial, scratch that, the glomerular mesangial cells surround the glomerulus itself. And what they do, angiotensin 2, triggers those cells to contract, so they squeeze the glomerulus itself, and that decreases the surface area of the glomerulus available for filtration. So that's going to help reduce the glomerular filtration rate a little bit as well, which will help us maintain our blood pressure. Okay, figure 2512 from your textbook is a good one to take a look at because it summarizes everything that happens when you have a decrease in systemic blood pressure. Oops, my pen went off here. Coming back up. If you have a, here we go. If you have a decrease in systemic blood pressure, what happens intrinsically in the kidneys and extrinsically from outside the kidneys to help maintain the glomerular filtration rate? So that's a good, I'm not going to go through this figure here in a video lecture since we've already covered all this information in the last two video lectures, but that's a pretty good figure to go through and make sure you understand what's going on with each of those step-by-step processes that you see outlined there. Okay, so the next lecture we're going to talk about how urine is concentrated and then if rediluted. Urine concentration dilution is very important for your ultimate urine output, and we've talked before about how things like antidiuretic hormone influence the concentration or the dilution of urine, and so we'll learn more about how all this takes place in lecture number 6.